Enjoy a typical afternoon in New York City.
Groceries, man.
Hey, Mother.
My name is Paul Kersey. How's my wife?
I'm sorry. She died a few minutes ago, Mr. Kersey.
Any chance of catching these men?
There's a chance, sure.
Just a chance.
I'd be less than honest if I gave you more hope, Mr. Kersey.
This is Paul Kersey. This is the story of a man who decided to clean up the most violent town in the world.
I said turn around. Hand me the money.
He begins where all the super cops leave off.
Bugging has gone down by how much, sir?
$9.50 a week to $4.70, you reported last week.
You understand not so many people know that.
And, you want to keep it that way, huh?
Oh, no, we have to keep it that way, Inspector. This whole city would explode.
And if this person is listening to my voice, I urge him in the name of law and order to desist from this one-man crusade and turn himself into the police.
Let's see the money, man.
Call him a mad vigilante. Call him a hero. Either way, he's always on target.
We want you to get out of New York. Permanently.
Never make a death wish. Because a death wish always comes true. And you get to love it.
Okay, I wasn't really sure whether to do this 3 separate reviews or do one review of all 3 movies here, but I think I'm just going to try to do them all at once since I kind of watched them all within the same kind of period of time. Watched Death Wish 2 first, and then went back and watched Death Wish 1, which I'd seen before. And then I went and rented Death Wish 3. So 1 and 2 are on Netflix. 3 I rented at Vulcan Video. I hadn't seen part 1 in several years, so I watched part 2 first, because I'd never seen that before. But I'm going to try to talk about these in order. Probably makes more sense. Death Wish 1... Well, everyone knows about this series. They made it to 5 movies, and Charles Bronson he was already 52 or 53 when Death Wish 1 was released. So he was already pretty old, or not old, but getting up there, you know. This guy, I mean, the whole reason I decided to watch these movies is because I watched The Mechanic and 10 to Midnight, both on Netflix, and kind of reminded me how cool this guy is and how cool his movies are, especially his movies in the 70s. I think he kind of got a little... I kind of phoned him in later on, like in the 80s and 90s, I think, but I think the 70s was really his peak. And it's interesting, this guy, I mean, think about it, 1921 is when he was born. He was already in his 40s when he made all those spaghetti western movies. He made Once Upon a Time in the West when he was in his late 40s already. And before he even made Death Wish, he was already a huge star in Europe. I was reading about this. He had a nickname. It's called Il Bruto. Like, you know, the brute, the badass. That was his nickname, which is appropriate. But this is before he made any Death Wish movies. This is like before all his like 70s action flicks. This is just for his like westerns and and his stuff he'd done in the 50s and 60s, which most of us don't even remember now. He's in The Dirty Dozen, The Great Escape, Magnificent Seven. He played a lot of supporting roles in these kind of movies. But he definitely, he was a superstar before this in Europe, but this movie definitely made him a big star in America. Yeah, I mean, it's a great movie. I still think some of his other films during that time period are just as good or even better. Like The Mechanic. I mean, that's a classic. That's, I rented Mr. Majestic. I love that movie too. That's around the same time period as this one. Plays a melon farmer who has to get get back at these creeps who are trying to move in on his farm, and it's funny. I mean, Charles Bronson, he plays the same character whether he's a melon farmer or an architect, like he is in the Death Wish movies. Anyway, this first one, this sort of sets up the whole character, the whole situation. You've got Charles Bronson is this mild-mannered architect. He's on the liberal side. He's anti-gun. He was a conscientious objector during the Korean War, and then his wife and daughter get raped, and his wife is killed while he's gone one day, and something kind of snaps. It takes a while. At first he's mourning, then he sees the same kinds of people on the street and gets mad and starts experimenting with, he puts a roll of quarters in a sock. He kind of experiments with that, tries, hits a few people with that, but it doesn't work that great. The coins fall out sometimes. It's kind of cool. I like these opening scenes that kind of define his character. They sort of make this first Death Wish a little more of a realistic kind of movie, or kind of has more emotional impact. I think the fact that you got all this set up and you got his scene, just him making that transition from bleeding heart liberal to vigilante justice guy. It's done pretty well, not super realistic, especially in the fact that he's able to get away for so long. I mean, they try to explain it even though he's an architect and he's a pacifist, he's still a dead-eye shot with a gun, because his father was a big gun advocate and a hunter, and so he grew up with all these things. He knows his way around weapons, but his father died in a hunting accident, so he swore off of them. But once he goes back, he's right in there. He knows how to shoot a gun. He knows how to aim. He knows how to fire, and he knows what he's doing. And the big change for him comes when he decides to go to Arizona to meet with a client about a big land project for his business, for his architecture business. And this guy's a real cowboy, right? He's got he's total opposite of Bronson. He's like Arizona cowboy, New York architect, and the cowboy kind of he takes to Bronson. He likes the guy, so he takes him to go on a firing range, and he sees how good Bronson is, and he gives him a gift, which is this big old gun. I'm not a big gun person, so I don't really know what it's. If I can find it. Well, I can't find what type of gun, but it's a big old freaking gun. And he goes out and he keeps it in his in his office and stuff. And he figures out he kind of. He tests the waters. He goes out there and he goes into the bad part of town, and one day he gets mugged, and he actually shows some fear, but he turns around, shoots the guy. It's a cool scene, but you really see this is really the only Death Wish movie where you see Charles Bronson more vulnerable. He's afraid of what he's getting into. But he's very likable in this movie. I mean, I really like this guy, and I like the whole thing of how, you know, Charles Bronson was a big Western star before these movies, and in this movie he's kind of like he sort of takes on the whole Old West attitude. Like he kind of, after talking with the Arizona guy, he sees like a Wild West show kind of thing, where he's at in Arizona, and it shows them like shooting each other, stunts and everything, and that kind of gets him thinking like as a you know, like a Western gunman. He kind of talks that he starts talking that way. Like he tells the muggers to like fill your hand, which means I guess draw. Like he talks in like that Western lingo sometimes. So you kind of see, I like this. You kind of see him as a little bit crazy. You know, he's not all there. He's likable, but he's not like this hero that he becomes in later movies. And he's not a comic book hero yet. He's still a real person who's kind of crazy. And then in the other side of the movie, later on in the second half, they introduce Vincent Gardenia, who is the cop, and he's cool too. I like this guy. I like this detective. I like this actor. He's entertaining. He's like a typical New York cynical cop guy, and he wants to catch this guy, but the mayor and the bigwigs don't want him arrested because they don't want to make him a martyr. They like that. I mean, they see that his little vigilante, his whole vigilante thing has brought crime down in the city, like in half. It's cut crime like in half, and they like that. They want people to believe that he's out there. They don't want him actually out there, but they want people to believe he's there. So the crime will stay down, but we won't have this lone gunman out there, like vigilante, whatever, causing trouble. And Vincent Gardenia is sort of like, all right, well, his name's Detective Ochoa in the movie. He's like, fine, you know, whatever you want. So he tries to scare him off, and he like calls him up and says, hey, you're being watched by police. He tries to scare him off, but it doesn't really work. So finally, you know, he's following him. Bronson realizes he's being followed, so finally he tries to do his last little vigilante thing, but he gets shot in the process by a mugger, and he's taken to the hospital. Detective Ochoa basically tells him, look, you got to get out of town. You're not going to get arrested. We're going to forget all about this, but you're going to move and not going to come back. And so he does. And he basically moves to Chicago, and you see a scene with like some bunch of Chicago hoodlums attacking some girl, and Charles Bronson helps her out, and he makes this little gesture with his finger like he's about to shoot him, you know, kind of like, well, it's going to continue in this new city. He's going to keep going with this. You know, he's not going to stop. You know, he's already gone on this path, and he can't let go of it now. I mean, his whole family's gone. His daughter is a vegetable, pretty much. You know, when she gets raped, she becomes catatonic, and it's pretty sad. You know, so you really like this guy. I mean, Bronson, very likable hero, man of few words. You know, he doesn't talk much, but he's charming. You know, he doesn't smile that much, but once in a while he'll smile. You know, he's not a real. He doesn't really get into the subtleties of life. You know, he's just like, he doesn't. You know, like when he's doing his when he's killing the muggers, he doesn't make a lot of like little like one-liners. You know, he's pretty much straight to the point. You know, I kind of like that. This series, it's kind of like a comic book series in a way, like, especially with the later movies. But this one kind of, you know, if you think of it like compared to the Superman movies, Superman 1 was the big the introduction, where you find out about how he got to be Superman. This is kind of like this with this one. This is how he became the vigilante. And then later movies, he goes from there. We already know how he became the vigilante. Now, what else is he going to do? Part one is, well, all three that I watched are directed by Michael Winner. And they're directed well, especially the first two. The third one, not as much, but still decent. But we'll get into that later. Michael Winner, good director. I mean, in this one especially, I think part two, he really he makes these movies like a real punch in the gut, like he doesn't mess around. Like Charles Bronson isn't portrayed as like this simple, straightforward hero. Sometimes he is, but if you really pay attention, like he's not all there. In these first two movies, he's not all there, I don't know if you really look at him as a hero or as a guy who is dealing with his own issues, that he happens to become a hero to the city because of what he does, but he's not trying to be a hero. He's just trying to get past his family's assault by like kind of getting back a little bit, not being so like vulnerable and like not just sitting there like a sitting duck. Like he's gonna fight back. And Michael Winner, I'm not really sure. I don't recognize much of what he's done besides these movies. He did do The Mechanic too. Mechanic kind of has some similar feel. The Mechanic's even more like Charles Bronson is not the hero in The Mechanic. He is a bad person. In this one, he's not a bad person, but he's a flawed person. He's not perfect. Let's see. Yeah, it looks like Death Wish 3 was the last one he did. So it's appropriate I'm doing all three of these movies together because these are the only ones that Michael Winner directed. So I think they my feeling is that they went a lot more downhill after those, for 4 and 5. But I'll give them a chance. I haven't seen them yet, but. And one interesting thing about the first one is one of the muggers is played by Jeff Goldblum, which I think this must be one of his first roles. Taking a look here. Yeah, it's his very first role. And after that, he was in a couple of Robert Altman movies, and later on Annie Hall, and then finally, like a little while later, like quite a bit later, was when he actually became a star on his own. He was playing all these bit parts all the way up into the mid-'80s, and finally I think The Fly was one, Silverado, a couple other movies where he started to come into his own, but this one it's a very small part. He plays one of the rapists, and he's a real dick, he plays the dick very well. But I thought it was funny, like that the gang is all white. This is like you can't get away with that anymore. I mean, like back then, it's like, oh sure, sure, why not? All the punks are white. There's no black gang members. He does kill a few black muggers later, and they kind of make a point of that. He goes to this party and people are discussing the vigilante and they're like, oh, he's racist. He's killing more blacks than whites. And someone else is like, well, there's more black muggers than white muggers. So, of course he's going to kill more blacks than whites. Doesn't make him racist. Stuff like that. This movie kind of like pushes some buttons, It doesn't take the easy way. It makes you think. It doesn't, is he racist? Is he what he's doing right? They don't make it that cut and dry. So anyway, after this one came Death Wish 2, but Death Wish 2 didn't come until about 8 years later. So they waited a long time to make a sequel. And not sure why that is. But Charles Bronson returns as Paul Kersey. This is 1982. Basically, in this one has a similar opening scene where this time his daughter, who's still alive, but she's catatonic still after all these years. She and the housekeeper are at home while Bronson's gone, and another group of punks comes and beats them up, rapes them both, and kills the housekeeper, kidnaps the daughter. Later on, but they don't rape the daughter right away. They kidnap her first and then rape her later on, and then she tries to get away and falls out of a window and onto a big spiked gate, and she's dead. So the opening of this movie is even more cold-blooded than the first one, because, I mean, his only thing left is his daughter, and his daughter's already been raped once, and she gets raped again and killed this time. It's like, man, could anything worse happen to her? It's kind of sad. So, I mean, you feel real bad for her, and you feel bad for him. He's got to go through this again. And you feel bad for the housekeeper. It's like, you don't want to be friends with Charles Bronson. You don't want to be part of his family. You don't want to be part of his close circle of friends. You don't want to be anywhere near him, because you will get killed and possibly raped. So, anyway, that happens. Bronson's pissed. This time he doesn't bother going to the police. Like, he's been through this. He doesn't even tell the police. He actually sees the punks because he walks in on it, and they knock him out before he can do anything. But he actually got a good look at him. So this movie kind of gets interesting, because the first one, he doesn't get back at the actual criminals. He gets back at crime in the city as a whole. But in the second one, he knows the criminals. He finds those criminals one by one and kills them, and that's it. He might kill a few other people on the way, but his thing in this one is not being a vigilante so much as just getting personal revenge, and doing it without the police, because he doesn't trust the police because they weren't very helpful the last time. And this time his girlfriend's played by Jill Ireland, who is Bronson's real life wife. And she's cool. She's been in a lot of his movies because they were married. And she does a good job. She's not a huge part of the movie, because he's hiding all of the stuff from her. He doesn't want her to know that he's a vigilante. By the end of the movie, he's about to finish the last little bit of his vigilante justice, the last person he's about to kill. So he asks her to marry him right before he pulls this off, and then when he's done, the idea is they're going to move away and start a new life together. But unfortunately, she finds out he's a vigilante. She says yes, but then while he's gone, she finds out who he is and leaves a note and says, "Sorry, I can't do it. Goodbye." So, this time the punks are black and white. They're equal. So there's blacks and whites in the gang, and that's still kind of weird though, because it just seems weird to have like a gang. When we think of gangs now, it's like, most of like the gangs in the inner city are all black or Mexican. There's hardly any Mexicans in these movies, mostly black and white and some Mexicans. But you think of it now, it's like all black, all Mexican. And then there's gangs, but more like mafia gangs. You might get like white, more of like the white collar, I guess, gangs. But this one is like half black, half white. They get along, It's weird now, and maybe back then it wasn't such a racially divided thing, but it just seems it's awkward watching it now. It seems kind of fake. But but the gang they're played well though. They pull it. I mean, Lawrence Fishburne is one of the main gang members, and he has this really goofy, like hysterical laugh that he does when he's assaulting Charles Bronson family. He wears these like cheesy like visor glasses, like Geordi on, like a pink version of what Geordi wears on Star Trek: The Next Generation. And it's weird. They're like break dancers. Two of them have this like little musical thing they do on the side. It's kind of weird, but anyway, he sees them all. He tracks them down, and he kills them. So I like this movie almost a little more than the first one in a way, because even though I think that they kind of overdid it with the opening scenes, like his whole family got assaulted in the first one. They could have made it a different kind of thing in the second one. Like, what are the odds that his family's going to get assaulted in the exact same way twice? And they do sort of linger on the rape scene a little bit, like they seem to be. There's a little bit. It's a little bit uncomfortable. Like, are we supposed to be enjoying this? It's kind of. It's pretty graphic. Like one of them, like shows them like, licking. I'm not gonna get too graphic with it, but it's very, for an R-rated movie, they extend the rape scene out pretty far with both the daughter and with the housekeeper. So I kind of felt a little bit uncomfortable. Felt like they were like lingering on it just for exploitation's sake. But at the same time, it does make you hate make you hate this group and want them to die. So it does its job because you really root for Bronson to kill the motherfuckers, and he does. And that's pretty much the movie. He goes through to each one of them and kills them all. And he doesn't make some big statement. He just says goodbye, shoots them, and it's a badass movie. I think it's a very worthy sequel. Maybe the best of the whole series.
It happened once before.
Some muggers followed my wife and daughter home from the market.
It's about to happen again.
The police there got a very good description of the muggers, too. But it didn't do any good.
We do what we can.
And so does he.
Is this your daughter, Mr. Kersey? Mr. Kersey. Is that Carol?
When murder and rape are the crimes, Bronson is the only punishment. Charles Bronson, Death Wish 2.
There's something else you should know, sir. Paul Kersey now lives in Los Angeles.
Oh, my God.
Now you tell me there's a vigilante out there.
You believe in Jesus?
Yes, I do.
Well, you're going to meet him.
He killed 9 people in New York City 4 years ago. The people he killed were muggers. He became a hero.
What did he look like?
He was a very good citizen, that's what he was. That guy saved our lives, damn it. Where the hell were you guys, giving out parking tickets?
When violence rules the city, when the police can't stop it, one man will, his way.
Watch out!
Charles Bronson.
Goodbye.
Death Wish 2. He's doing it for you.
And I like also that Vincent Gardenia returns, but it's, going back to the Superman analogy, Superman 2, in a way, kind of improved on the first one because he didn't have to have all that backstory. And this one, Vince Gardenia's in it, but it's not so much of him. It's not like the whole second half of Death Wish where it's all about Vincent Gardenia. This one is just kind of, he figures out that Bronson is back on the loose and tries to catch him and ends up, and I like how it ended too, because he follows him to a shootout, and he helps him, and he ends up getting shot. And Charles Bronson goes, "Hey, you stuck up for me. Why'd you do that?" And he's like, "Well, hey, it was either you or them, so I picked you." So it's kind of touching, like, you know, even this cop who was his nemesis in the first one, he helps him out, kind of redeems himself. And it's a good reason too, you know. It's them or you, you know. You know, I don't like what you're doing, but I'll take that over gangs. So Death Wish 2 just doesn't bring up as many of the issues, you know. Like the first one was really kind of like captured the imagination of people at the time because there was so much crime in New York, and it was kind of like a wish fulfillment kind of thing. And it was all about the vigilante part of it. This one's more about just straight revenge. And so there's not as it's a little bit more I guess I don't know how to put it. It's not as meaningful, I guess, you know. It's more just pure entertainment rather than like having a message underneath it, but I still think it's a really good movie. It's probably my favorite of the three. Jill Ireland, by the way, died in 1990, just before Bronson did. Charles Bronson, he was already in his early 60s in this Death Wish 2 movie. Early 60s, I mean, he's still looking pretty damn good for early 60s. I mean, he's still a badass. Like, I still wouldn't mess with the guy. So, he still's pulling it off. Now, Death Wish 3 is only 3 years later. He's already looking a little bit long in the tooth, just a little bit. He seems to be phoning it in just a little bit more on Death Wish 3. The story's not quite as good. It's more of a comic book, more of a cartoon. Like the story, very unrealistic. Obviously, it's even more than the first two. Very unrealistic. It's more like all out war. Like he pretty much. Well, in Death Wish 3, he goes to visit a friend in New York. I guess he's still living in Chicago or somewhere else. And, you know, right before he comes to visit, these punks break in and beat him up and kill him. So Charles Bronson walks in. Unfortunately, right when he walks in, finds him dead, the police come. Of course, they blame Bronson, throw him in jail, and in jail, he meets up with this punk who's a real asshole, threatens to kill him, and promises to kill some little old lady on his behalf. He's a real asshole. And so, and that guy is... Okay, and this villain is played by Gavin O'Herlihy. His name's Fraker. The bad guys in this movie have pretty funny names, like Fraker, Giggler, Hermosa, Angel, the Cuban. Much more like cartoony comic book kind of characters, and the gang is really comic book like because they control this entire block. And they just completely control it. Cops don't even bother with it anymore. A bunch of old people live in this building and they refuse to leave. One of them is played by, well, one of them was that friend of Charles Bronson who got killed. And anyway, while Bronson's in jail, the head detective, he finds out who he is. He tries to use a alias, but the detective who's played by Ed Lauder, he figures out it's Paul Kersey pretty easily, and he says, hey, you know what? I'm going to let you back out on the streets. All you got to do is give us some tips so we can make a few arrests, and I'll let you go. And so right away, it's kind of a lot even more unrealistic than the first one. It's like, he's going to let him go that easily after all the stuff he's done. No, I don't think so, but he does, and he goes back and he meets Martin Balsam, who is one of the neighbors, and Martin Balsam gives him the lowdown on all the punks in the city, and he's getting excited because he sees this guy Bronson. He sees he doesn't fuck around. He sees that this guy is gonna stand up for himself and maybe clean up this town a little bit. And one thing I liked about this movie is that it did have Martin Balsam in it, and those two guys, Charles Bronson and Balsam, are two movie badasses that go from way back. They've both been around for a while, and both kind of old time actors. Even though they're in this modern day action movie, they kind of go way back. So it's kind of cool having them in scenes together. Basically Gavin O'Hurley, Fraker, he's cool too. I think this actor did a good job with this character. He's a memorable bad guy. And they go and, Bronson, he does little things here and there, but he goes too far when he decides to, punks are constantly breaking into people's apartments and stuff, so he has this idea. He just takes a big bed full of nails and sticks it underneath the window. So when some guy tries to get in through the window, he just steps right on a bunch of nails. And it's simple. It's kind of a cool little technique he used, and it's simple, and it worked. And they get pissed. They're like, we need to get rid of this guy. He's trying to fight us, and we're in charge here, so we're gonna kill his ass. And they start really laying down the law, or really harassing people, and they blow up Martin Balsam's taxi cab service. I mean, they're using heavy weaponry and a lot more weapons than in the first two movies. So that's another plus, that this movie has major weaponry and full on battle scenes. Really, I mean, it's not just individual people getting shot. This is a battle in the streets. And it doesn't really bring up in the first two movies, it kind of brought up the moral issues. This one is a lot more simplistic from the moral side, which I really didn't. That's kind of a drawback for this movie, I think, because it kind of makes it more comic booky in the way Charles Bronson is more of a straightforward hero now. He's the superhero, and everybody looks up to him, and everybody is on board with what he does. Everybody in the neighborhood loves him because he's helping out. And they don't show anything maybe people resent him because he's egging on these bad guys, and he's making the bad guys come hit them even harder. So nobody really complains about that. They could have made it a little more ambiguous, but so that's one. It's a lot more simplistic, a lot more like a comic book. But on the other hand, I did like the ending because like I said, it becomes a war. Bronson's friend happened to have a machine gun laying around from World War II, I think, that he kept around, and he was saving it for when he really needed it. He was planning to use it on these guys. And so Charles Bronson uses that thing, and he just mows people down. He just cleans up the neighborhood. And in fact, the cop, Ed Lauder, he turns out to be an alright guy. He seems like an asshole at first, but he ends up helping Bronson out. I like this character because you think he's a selfish bastard, just using Bronson for his own gain. But it turns out he really approves of what Bronson's doing. He admires the guy because he can actually get stuff done, and the police can't. So Ed Lauder, he ends up, his name's Stryker in the movie. He ends up helping him out. Him and Bronson have this scene where they're going down the street shooting people just like in a western. Going down the street, finding the bad guys and shooting them, and they do it together. And it's kind of like a cool like little buddy scene they have there, like you know, working together for a common problem. I liked his character, even though he's no Vincent Gardenia. It would have been cool to have Vincent Gardenia back, but he died in the second one. So yeah, he is missed. But this character is pretty cool too. I kind of liked the character. I liked how that all worked out. Alex Winter, who everyone knows as Bill from Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure, he can be seen a couple times in this movie. He's one of the gang members. So that was pretty cool. Overall, this is a pretty good sequel. It's not, you know, when you're watching it, it is a lot more simplistic than the first two, and there's some things you wish they could have done more like the first ones. But this is 1985. This is the year of Rambo Part 2. You know, this is the year of, you know, heavy battle scenes and heavy weaponry in movies. You know, this is the year of Rambo. It had to go over the top. He had to, you know, there had to be like explosion. He has a freaking grenade launcher. I mean, he's got like weapons out the kazoo. You know, he's basically like a Rambo in this, a 60-year-old Rambo. So you can't really take it as any kind of realistic kind of thing, but it's still a cool movie. Bronson, you know, he's never been the greatest actor in the world, but even in this one, he's kind of phoning it in a little more than he did in the first two, I think. Just a little bit. At the same time, though, he's still cool as hell. I mean, this guy, he barely talks, and yet a woman who's half his age drives like halfway across the city to ask him out. You know, because he's Charles Bronson, and Charles Bronson, he's like reluctant. Finally, it's like, oh, okay, fine, I'll go out with you. It's like, man, what a cool dude. I want to be like that when I'm 60. So, if you're going to watch Part 3, I would definitely recommend watching at least Part 2 first. Both of the first ones. I think you really need to see the first two to appreciate the third one, because I think the third one might seem a little more cheesy. But if you've seen the first two, then you kind of got, you know this character a little better. It's not so bad, but overall, I think it's a pretty solid sequel. And again, Michael Winter is still a director in this one, and even he's losing his touch a little bit by now. You know, he's phoning it in as a director a little bit more, but it's still a good movie. I'll be interested to see 4 and 5 and see where it goes from there. But and as far as that bad guy goes, Fraker, who he's played by Gavin O'Hurley. He also adds a lot to this movie because he makes a really good villain. He makes a really cool villain, I think. He's got this weird like stripe design painted on his forehead. I don't know if that's supposed to be a tattoo. But he's a real dick. He plays the part well. He does a good job. And a couple more things about Death Wish 2. I thought they did a good job of setting up him going back into the vengeance business. They show him like going on this like after his daughter's attacked. He shows him kind of going on this nature walk, and it's kind of a cool scene because it sort of like transitions. Like it seems like he's going through a peaceful, reflective kind of walk, and the music kind of changes and it transitions into him like chopping this log really violently with an axe. Like he's like training himself to cut somebody up or something is what it looks like. And it's really like ominous. Like the music in this movie is really, in the first one too, actually all of them kind of have a similar soundtrack, but the way they use the music in the second one, I think it really brings out how like, how this is not like a moral crusade he's going on. He's just going for pure revenge, just like cold-blooded revenge. I like that. So the music is definitely a highlight for all these movies, I think, but especially the second one. It's kind of cool how like he's sort of a little more experienced now, so he knows exactly like what to do when this happens. Like he puts on his inner city type of clothes, his little cap and like leather jacket to sort of blend in, and his girlfriend goes into his house while he's gone, and you know he's like, oh, it's all right, you know, and then he immediately has the locks changed, so she can't get in again. Like he doesn't want her involved, and it's kind of weird because if I remember right, the first one, all his victims, he goes out and searches for victims, but he's waiting for them to attack him first. He's waiting for them to mug him. He's going into the neighborhood, like he's trying to lead them into it, but they attack first. And but he does chase after them sometimes after they run away, but he's waiting for them to do something. Now, in the second one, they've already raped his daughter and his housekeeper and attacked him. He doesn't wait for them to attack. So you got these scenes where he's killing unarmed, defenseless people. Yeah, he's getting revenge for something they did before, but it's a lot more like, whew, wow, you know, like there's one guy. The one that I really remember, like the first thug that he murders, is pretty memorable because the guy's defenseless, and he's got a cross, like a cross on around his neck, and Bronson goes, "Are you Christian?" You're like, "Do you believe in God?" Or "Do you believe in Jesus?" Something like that. And the guy's like, "Yes, I do." He's very sincere. He's like, "Yeah, I believe in Jesus." It's like, "Well, you're about to meet him." Shoots the fuck out of him. Kills him right there. It's like, wow. Man. And there's another scene where he just says goodbye. He doesn't spend a lot of time on like, you know, hilarious one-liners. He just cuts right to the chase, you know. And he's not sympathetic. Yeah, okay, the guy believes in God. Well, you're about to meet him. I like that. He does not, you know, no sympathy at all. And you might think I wrote this down. I'd forgotten about it, but the very ending, he ends up. You might think this ending's a little over the top, but I kind of liked it. I thought they did it well. It's a little bit over the top, but basically the final guy is arrested, but he gets let off on an insanity charge. So this is more like social, you know, like kind of playing on people's fears and what they see in the headlines. Like you got a murderer who gets let off because he pleads insanity, and he ends up in a mental hospital. So Bronson, he dresses up like a doctor. He goes in there and goes in there as the guy's doctor, and he gets away with this pretty easily. So the guy, there's a little bit of a fight, and the guy kind of runs away, and basically they're in the electroshock therapy room, and the guy gets somehow gets his hand. Oh, he's punching Bronson. Bronson ducks out of the way, and his hand goes right into the electroshock machine and electrocutes him. So it's a very like spectacular death, you know, not like the typical death. You know, most of the Death Wish deaths up to this point were just straight, you know, getting shot with a gun. This is like one of the more creative death scenes up to this point. Of course, in the third one, the guy gets blown up by a bazooka, which is a little bit more, a little bit more spectacular than this. But up to this point, this is probably one of the more spectacular death scenes. And it's the very last one, so that's appropriate. You know, the last guy gets taken out in spectacular fashion. And again, Vincent Gardenia, he really adds a lot to these first two movies. And again, I said this before. I don't think he's really missed in the third one. He was an important part of the whole story. I think he made a good foil for Bronson. And he has some good scenes. Even though he dies at the end, I like what he says to his partner as he's going down. He's going down to find Bronson in the gunfight with the gang members. And before he goes, he says, "What does he say? If you hear shooting, don't worry. It's just target practice." And Lawrence Fishburne, it's definitely an early role for him. And he's kind of distracting because when him and his gang are attacking and raping Bronson's daughter and housekeeper, Lawrence Fishburne has this like crazy laugh. He sounds like Daffy Duck. It's kind of distracting, but I guess he's supposed to be crazy. And they do this in the first movie too. They're just constantly laughing throughout the whole thing. It's just weird. I guess just to show how like psychotic and out of control the crime is, and
New York, a city pushed to the edge. People pushed to the limit, and no one's got the guts to stop them.
It's collection time, Charlie.
3 murders, 4 rapes, 9 acts of random violence. This isn't a neighborhood, it's a war.
But there is one way. One man who won't be pushed. Charles Bronson.
What's the problem? Now you're gonna die.
It'll be just like before, Mr. Vigilante, with one important difference. You're gonna work for me.
People have got to start to fight back and hard.
I sent them a message.
That's him.
I'll take care of him. And now, he's in the middle of a war.
See what you done? You got me mad.
In a world gone mad, there is only one law. His. Charles Bronson, Death Wish 3. Bronson's back in New York, bringing justice to the streets. Charles Bronson, Death Wish 3.
A couple more things I wanted to say about Death Wish 3. His motivation in this movie is a little bit weaker than in the first two. Also, the first two he had a lot stronger motivation, though. It was a personal attack on his own family. Both those movies. And in this one, yeah, you have his friend killed at the very beginning, but it's someone that never appeared in the previous movies. We get a little bit of background on him, how they were friends in the Korean War, but you don't really feel his like driving force as much in the third one. He does, that friend does get killed. His girlfriend gets killed in the movie too, but again, that's someone you haven't met for very long. He's only known her for a couple days. He did spend the night with her, but it's just it's like it is motivation, but it's just not as you don't feel that like you're not like feeling that anger, like you do in the first two. And this you could say that's better because the first two you have those really disturbing rape scenes in the beginning, and Death Wish 3 doesn't have that. So some people might like that a little more. It's a little more not as disturbing, I guess. Although you do have a rape later on of one of the neighbors, but it's not as graphic. It ends pretty quickly. It's not as uncomfortable, I guess. It's still, any rape scene in a movie is uncomfortable, but it's a little more, I don't know, it's a little less heavy than the first two, I thought. His love interest, Deborah Raffin, I'm not sure how you pronounce that. She's a district attorney who notices that he doesn't press charges against the police in the very beginning when they wrongfully arrested him. And she gets interested in him. And she actually drives all the way across town. This guy, I mean, this woman's probably, she's got to be half his age. Maybe she's 20 years younger than him, 15 years younger. I mean, she looks young. Yeah, she's half his age. She's like in her 30s in this movie, early 30s, and of course Bronson's in his 60s. But she throws herself at him. She basically said, I came all the way across town because I'm going to be gone soon, and I wanted to see you again. And she basically he's reluctant. He doesn't want to go out with her, but she begs him. So he's like, okay, fine. So that's Charles Bronson. That's his kind of charm. He doesn't have to try. He doesn't talk a lot. He doesn't try to pour on the charm. He's not really a ladies' man, but ladies throw themselves at him. It's like something about him. Even at 60, she wants to go to bed with him the first night, which they do. Unfortunately, you don't have a sex scene with a 60-year-old Charles Bronson, but you do get to see the aftermath, him buttoning up his shirt again. It's like I said before, I hope that's me when I'm 60. I hope I'm that cool. Probably won't be. Not very many people are. So the love interest kind of comes and goes pretty fast. It's not a very major part of the movie. So you don't really get to care about that character a whole lot. And Charles Bronson, he seems kind of upset when she, they beat her up, leave her unconscious, and then take the brakes off her car. So the car rolls down the street and explodes, crashes into another car. He looks upset for about 30 seconds, and then he gets over it and keeps going with his war on crime. So that's not didn't seem like that's really much of a motivation for him. It just kind of adds to what he's already doing. Charles Bronson, well, the guy lived to be 81. He died in 2003. He died of pneumonia, but he also had Alzheimer's in the last couple of years of his life. Which is pretty sad, but at the same time, he lived a long life. He was at his peak as far as movie star. He hit his peak in his 50s and 60s, which you can't say that for too many people. He hit his stride late in life for some reason. But he's an interesting guy. He grew up. He was born in 1921. He's Lithuanian. That explains his sort of face. He played a lot of foreign characters. He played Russians. He's played Indians, Native American Indians. But he's Lithuanian, so he's got that kind of generic foreign look to him. He can play lots of different types, lots of different ethnicities and that kind of thing. You can read all this on IMDb. I'll just go through a little bit of it. It's he was described by one critic as Clark Gable left out in the sun too long. It's an interesting description. He made a lot of movies with Roger Corman in his early years, moved on to westerns, became big in Europe, and then came back to the U.S. and made all these a couple more westerns, and made a lot of crime films, including Death Wish, and that's where he, hit his peak popularity. And he sort of kept that character, that vigilante character, throughout the rest of his career. Sort of played variations on that. because it worked. And when something worked for him, he kind of stuck with it. Some of these movies he's made, 10 to Midnight, The Evil That Men Do. I want to review some of these someday because those are some intense movies. I mean, they're action movies, but they really get into like some heavy psychological and disturbing stuff. Like 10 to Midnight's all about like this deranged serial killer who kills people in the nude because he's got this fetish, this weird like psychological disturbance. And it's a disturbing movie. The Evil That Men Do is even more so because that's all he's going after. This doctor who he's this expert on torture who he's basically going to assassinate this doctor who is teaching these different like third world countries how to do torture on people. And there's a lot of really graphic scenes in it and lots of graphic descriptions in that movie. It's a disturbing movie too. The movies he made, they were really hard-hitting movies, not just like, they weren't always just cartoon action violence. It was like, he made some movies that were kind of more thought-provoking, I think. Dick Van Dyke received a lemon cake every Christmas from Charles Bronson. Interesting. This is interesting. He was the first actor who John Carpenter considered for the role of Snake Plissken in Escape from New York. And the reason he didn't end up using him is because he thought he was too old and too tough. I get the too old part, but it's kind of funny because Snake Plissken is supposed to be this really tough character, and he felt that Bronson was too tough, so he got Kurt Russell instead. He also did an audition for Superman, the original Superman, which ended up going to Christopher Reeve. Can you imagine Charles Bronson as Superman? That's an interesting one. He was also considered for The French Connection, which ended up going to Gene Hackman. I mean, I can see him in a lot of these parts. Not Superman, but I could see him in Escape from New York. I could see him in The French Connection. And Bill Murray said he based his character in Lost in Translation. He says that was based on Charles Bronson. So yeah, all three of these movies are worth watching. My order of from favorite to least favorite would probably be 2 favorite, 1 second favorite, and then third favorite. I still liked it a lot. I'd still watch it again. So that's it. Death Wish 1, 2, and 3.